Selamat sore dan selamat malam Bapak dan Ibu. Selamat datang kembali di public webinar kita minggu ini di seri AIFIS-RISTEK BRIN Academic Writing Workshop. Again, it is a pleasure to welcome all of you back this evening, waktu Indonesia Barat, atau in the morning Eastern Time in the United States. Saya perkenalkan sekali lagi, saya adalah Neta Anggia, Direktur Eksekutif dari American Institute for Indonesian Studies or AIFIS, mengikuti meeting ini dari kantor AIFIS di Ithaca, New York. Bersama saya juga ada staf AIFIS lainnya, Dr. Isabella Tirto Waluyo, Dr. Johan Purnama, dan Bapak Anas Bentari sebagai Program Manager kami di Indonesia. AIFIS has been, dan juga Bapak Dr. Yosef Jakababa, AIFIS has been organizing the academic writing workshops with generous support from the Henry Lewis Foundation. We also appreciate the support of our collaborative partners, Universitas Indonesia, Universitas Gadjah Mada, and Universitas Atmajaya for co-hosting the previous workshops with us. This year, we are honored to organize the first virtual workshop series in partnership with the Indonesian Ministry for Research and Technology, the National Agency for Research and Innovation, or Kementerian Ristek dan Teknologi, Badan Riset dan Inovasi Nasional Republik Indonesia. Now, I'd like to welcome and introduce you to our distinguished speaker today, Dr. Paul Kratochka, and our moderator for today, Dr. Micah Fisher. Dr. Paul Kratochka is Publishing Director and formerly Director of NUS Press at the National University of Singapore. He served on the Board of Directors of the U.S. Association for Asian Studies from 2003 to 2005 and is past editor of the Journal of Southeast Asian Studies and current editor of the Journal of the Malaysian branch of the Royal Asiatic Society. He taught at the Ateneo de Manila from 1975 to 1977, University Science Malaysia from 1977 to 1987, and the National University of Singapore from 1987 to 2005. His research focuses on Southeast Asia, and he has published books and articles on the Japanese occupation, the history of rice cultivation, ethnic minorities, school textbooks, and academic publishing. He was a contributor to the Cambridge History of Southeast Asia, the Cambridge History of World War II, and the Routledge Handbook of Southeast Asian History, and serves on the boards of the International Journal of Asian Studies of the University of Tokyo, Southeast Asian Studies, CSEAS, Kyoto University, Transregional Historical Society, Transregional and National Studies of Southeast Asia of Sogang University, and the Journal of History of the Philippine Historical Society. He is the lead mentor for the U.S. Social Science Research Council's Global Scholars Initiative. Dr. Micah Fisher, our moderator for today, is a faculty member at the University of Hawaii at Manoa in the Matsunaga Institute for Conflict Resolution and the Program for Disaster Management and Humanitarian Assistance. He also holds a joint position in the Forestry Department at Hasanuddin University in Indonesia, where he serves as editor-in-chief of Forest and Society, a journal with an area focused on underrepresented regions in Southeast Asia. His research interests center on sustainability dimensions of landscapes and watersheds, and more specifically revolve around rural smallholder dilemmas and policies to empower land rights and livelihoods. We are pleased to welcome Dr. Kratochka with us today, and equally are pleased to have Dr. Micah Fisher as the moderator for the discussion and Q&A session. Before we begin our session, I'd like to remind everyone to please use the Q&A function to ask questions. Mohon mempergunakan fungsi Q&A untuk menanyakan pertanyaan. We will disable the chat function during the lectures. Jadi chat functionnya akan tidak dinyalakan selama lecture dan selama Q&A. For those of you who are viewing the workshop through the live streams on Facebook and YouTube, please write your questions in the comment section. Please also note that the entire workshop session will be recorded, and please mention your name and university or institutional affiliations when asking questions. Mohon Bapak dan Ibu mencantumkan nama jelas beserta afiliasi akademik atau institusional Anda saat mencantumkan pertanyaan. Without further ado, I'd like to invite my colleague and our session moderator today, Dr. Micah Fisher, to lead our session today. Bapak Micah, the floor is yours, and thank you very much.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. It's a pleasure to be with you all this evening. We have a very exciting program and a very distinguished speaker. And I will be providing support as moderator. I will be taking your questions. The instructions have been provided for you. Please do share your questions throughout this session. And I think without further ado, I think we should get the program started. I'd like to turn it over to Professor Dr. Kratoska to begin his presentation. You see the agenda online in front of you, and I look forward to engaging in this important webinar with you all this evening.
Well, thank you very much. As you see on the screen, this session will be divided into 3 parts. I'll be speaking about scholarly ethics, about writing for digital publication, and finally, why your dissertation is not a book. So to begin with scholarly ethics. Academic research rests on the integrity of scholars. Publishers, for the most part, are unable to identify unethical research. We rely on peer reviewers to identify issues, but peer reviewers are not always looking for this sort of issue as well. They will talk about the content in terms of factual matter, but thinking about ethical issues takes them into an area that probably they don't have any resources to check. The readers of an article are rarely going to check on the sources that are being used and whether they're being used accurately. And in any case, authors are unable to include all of the data. So to a great extent, we trust on the integrity of the scholars who are writing articles and books. So trust is really fundamental to the whole academic enterprise. And for that reason, lapses in ethics will attract very harsh responses. If somebody's caught plagiarizing, it can destroy their career. If you want to read more about this, you might go to the webpage of the Committee on Publication Ethics, or COPE, and read their code of conduct. So let's talk about plagiarism. What everyone understands is that plagiarism is the theft of words. It's using someone else's words as your own. Now, the way to get around this is quite simple. For direct quotations, you can either use block quotes, which means you indent the entire quoted set of quoted material. You identify the source, or you put it in quotation marks. You identify the source. There are limits to the number of words you can copy into your article as well. It's not a very rigid limit, but it's often better to paraphrase rather than to use direct quotes. Another form of plagiarism is self-plagiarism, and that's when you're reusing your own words without acknowledging that they've been published before. Now let's understand the problem that you get into with this, because books and articles consist entirely of words that have been used many times before. It's one of the miracles of language that we can put words together in so many forms. The word order used then becomes very important. So let me give you an example. Here are 14 words, and these are simple, ordinary words that anyone can use, but not in this way. If you were to take those words, put them into this sentence, books and articles consist entirely of words that have been used many times before, that would be plagiarism, because I wrote that sentence. If you look at the last slide, that's where it appeared. I looked it up on Google, and according to Google, nobody has ever used those words in that combination before. So if you took that sentence and used it without acknowledging me, you would have committed plagiarism. Plagiarism is also the theft of ideas. Now, certain kinds of information are common knowledge, and you certainly don't need to cite common knowledge. But citations are required for information and interpretations that are unique contributions. So if an author is giving or putting out an idea that nobody has used before, then that would, and you're using that in your own material, you would have to do a citation. And when in doubt, just go ahead and provide a citation. Now, all of this is covered under copyright. Now, copyright is literally the right to copy. But as we understand it, it's a legal right to intellectual property. And if you write something, it is your exclusive legal right to intellectual property that you have created. It is created automatically when you write something. It then becomes something that can be transferred or assigned. How long does copyright last? Well, in the US, the UK, and in Indonesia, it lasts for 70 years after the death of the author. Now, this means that anything that you've written cannot be used by somebody else until 70 years after your death, by which time you probably won't be paying much attention. But at the same time, it means you cannot use other people's work unless you can show that the author has been deceased for 70 years. There's another kind of copyright, though, which has become very prevalent in recent years. This is a Creative Commons copyright, and there are several different versions. What I put on the screen here is the most flexible, and the least flexible. So there's a Creative Commons copyright that lets others distribute, remix, tweak, and build upon the work of an author. That means including commercially, that is, they can put it out and sell it somewhere. So long as the original author gets credit. In other words, so long as it is attributed to the original author. Now, generally speaking, people in the humanities and social sciences don't like this. And the reason is that the contribution, sorry, I keep hitting the wrong button here. The reason is that the contribution of an author in humanities and social sciences is primarily not the data as much as it is the analysis and the interpretation. It is a much better arrangement for the sciences, where the idea is that a scientist does research, has data, and other people can then use that data to carry on the research tradition. Okay, then a second, the more restrictive Creative Commons copyright is attribution, non-commercial, and no derivatives. Under this copyright, others can download your works, they can share them with others so long as they credit you, but they cannot change them in any way, and they cannot use them commercially. Okay, people often ask the question, do I own my work? Do scholars own their own work? There's something called work for hire. And work for hire belongs to the person who did the hiring. So if you're employed by somebody to do research and you produce a piece of work for that person, you don't have rights to it because the person who paid you to do the work holds the rights. In the case of some universities, they claim the ownership of everything faculty members create under the principle of work for hire. In general, a university doesn't have much interest in writing in the humanities and social sciences. And so primarily this kind of provision has to do with work that might be copyright, or might be, I guess, monetized is the way to put it. So if it can be licensed for commercial use or something like that. If you sign a contract or an agreement with a publisher, you give up some of your rights. Now, there are two types of agreements. This applies to book contracts. It also applies to agreements to publish that are sent out with journal articles. So some of these agreements actually ask you to transfer copyright to the publisher. Other agreements limit the right to publish. So in that case, the publisher will say, you keep the copyright, but you give the publisher the exclusive right to publish the material. And generally, these agreements will have some sort of time period. But the ones that transfer copyright, today, the time period gets extended to a very long time in the case of books, because traditionally books were printed in a certain number. So a publisher might produce 500 or 1,000 copies. And once those copies were gone, the author might be able to request copyright be transferred back, because the contract will say that the copyright remains with the publisher so long as the book remains in print. This has changed because of print on demand. So these days, publishers can keep books in print almost indefinitely. And that means authors have trouble recovering their copyright if they want to do that. Okay, so I've been asked questions about this over the years. And one question that comes up is this: if I've published part of my dissertation as a book chapter, can I submit it to a journal as an article? And the answer to that basically is no. That would be self-plagiarism, and it would be unethical. So another question: if I published an article in a journal, could I use it as a chapter in my own book? And the answer generally for that is yes. In fact, a lot of journals will say in the agreement you sign when you publish with them that you're free to do this so long as it is your own book. Now, what this means is that if some commercial publisher comes to you and says, we would like to use your article in a class reader, then you have to go back to the publisher, and the publisher may well say, well, if you want to do that, then the publisher of the reader has to pay us a fee. So let's take a look at a list of unethical practices: making up information, fabrication of data. If an author contacts the peer reviewer, this also is unethical. Self-plagiarism is unethical. Salami publishing, which is where you produce the thinnest article possible based on the minimum of data, is also unethical. I don't think anyone would have the nerve to do this, but apparently it happens. If you submit an inquiry about an article to a journal along with a bribe, if you have an undisclosed conflict of interest, if the editor or the reviewers of the journal ask you to cite their work in order to build up their citation count, that's also unethical. Sometimes people will submit an article, they'll have the article go through refereeing, and then they decide they would rather send it somewhere else. So even though the article may have been accepted, they then write and they say, oh, I want to withdraw it and send it somewhere else because that will have more impact. Journals commit resources to refereeing articles. And once the journal has agreed to do this, and particularly once they've agreed to publish, it is unethical to withdraw. Of course, if you've stolen the article, that's definitely wrong. Dual submissions are also unethical. And what that means is if you send it to one journal, you commit it to that journal until that journal decides yes or no. If you send it to two journals at the same time, what's very likely to happen is that the editor of the second journal will send a letter off to a referee. And the referee will write back and say, well, that's interesting because, I just got an inquiry from another journal about the same article. And then we realize that you sent it to two journals at the same time. What's likely to happen in that case is that both editors will reject it. What about social media services, places where you can put your published articles online? Excuse me. These are commercial operations, Academia EDU and ResearchGate. Authors place material on these sites, and the sites offer free access. Often, if you do that, it's a violation of copyright, because if you have given an agreement to your publisher, giving the publisher either your copyright or exclusive access, it is a violation of copyright to upload the paper to Academia EDU and ResearchGate. And if you read the fine print, if you read the agreements on both of these sites, they say that if you upload material, you will indemnify the site against any legal action. So what that means is that if a publisher takes action against Academia EDU or ResearchGate for violation of copyright, then it's possible that it will go to court and somebody will will impose a fine on the social media site. If that happens, the social media site will say, well, we have an agreement and the author says that the author had the right to do this. So they will go to the authors and say, you're the ones who have to pay. So read these agreements before you sign them. There are other social media services that provide ways to put material online. I list them here without any recommendation one way or the other. If you want to find out what the policy of a journal is on copyright, open access, and self-archiving, you go to a website for Sherpa Romeo, and that will explain what the policies are of various journals. Then there is outright stealing, there's dishonesty, and there's an online site called SciHub, which gives free access to a vast database of research papers and books. This one is completely illegal. People have tried to get it taken down. There's a reason, which I'll tell you in a minute, that it hasn't worked. It compromises network security. It can jeopardize lawful access to papers written by university staff. It violates copyright, and it threatens publishers. The reason that nobody's had any success is that it's based in Kazakhstan, and legal action against it has been very difficult. Finally, there are predatory journals. These are journals that are created simply to collect article processing charges. They generally look like genuine scholarly journals, and the titles will sound very legitimate. The International Journal of Social Science and Humanities, or Humanities and Social Science, or the International Review of Social Science and Humanities. They claim that they're included in prestigious indexes. They claim that they have high impact factors. In reality, they do not have rigorous peer review. They are in existence in order to collect article processing charges. In other words, if you send an article there, they will ask you to pay for publication. And frequently, if you try to find out who the editor is, the physical location will be very hard to find. Just to give you a quick example, somebody sent me information about one of these publications and asked me if it was legitimate. So I looked at this and I found the address for the publisher and I looked it up. And it was an address on Park Avenue in New York City. Now, Park Avenue is a very expensive address, which was surprising for any publisher. So I did a Google search on that address and I discovered that what was there was a photocopy service that also rented mailboxes. So this journal had rented a mailbox at a prestigious address and hoped that you would think that was where they were located. So what are the warning signs if a journal might be a predatory journal? First of all, some of them will charge a submission fee rather than a publication fee. In other words, they ask you to pay when you submit. Now, some journals, reputable journals, do this, so it's not an absolute guarantee that this is not a legitimate journal, but be careful if you're asked to pay a submission fee. Second, the editorial board generally will have people who are not well established. You look at the names in your field and you are unlikely to recognize them. Sometimes they will be part of a very large group of new journals. Some of these journals come online as part of a package of 100 or 500 new journals. The journal issues often do not come out on time. The website is not professional. The ads often have, or there will be ads on the site. There's often poor English. And the content of the journal will differ from the title and the stated scope. If you publish in a predatory journal, the chances are very good that you're throwing your money away. You will get no credit for it. So you want to avoid these. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, there's something called the Directory of Open Access Publications. Look it up and see if the journal is there. Second, find out if the publisher is a member of the Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association. And then go to a website called Checksubmit.org. And there are lots of suggestions there about how to avoid predatory journals. There is a database, but it's only available in libraries that subscribe, that has details about good journals and bad journals, called Cable's Scholarly Analytics. And here's a list of some of the questions that you'll find on Checksubmit.org. But I won't read through those. If you want a copy, you can send a message and ask for that. So this is the end of part one. We'll resume in about 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Kratoska. Do you want to take, we have one follow-up question. I think it's a pretty interesting question related to some of the earlier points that you mentioned. This question's from Arini Utami from UGM. And she is asking this question about, what if you are an editor, right? If you have the position as an editor of a journal, what are the ethics of publishing in this, publishing an article in a journal that you serve as an editor on it? Is this considered unethical? What are the contours of this, this issue, and what are your thoughts on the matter?
Well, this is something that I've faced for many years because I was editor of the Journal of Southeast Asian Studies. I'm a Southeast Asia specialist. And I felt that it was not proper for me to publish in the journal that I edited. I have a little bit the same problem now with the Journal of the Malaysian branch of the Royal Asiatic Society because I'm a Malaysia-Singapore specialist. And I think the answer to that partly is you can stay out of the review process. And so you give it to an associate editor, you say, okay, I'd like to submit this, please do the refereeing without letting me know who the referees are or anything until the reports come in. You show me the reports anonymously. I don't think that's objectionable, but I think people might still raise questions about it. So if you have papers to publish, you're probably wiser to do it somewhere else. I have the same problem with NUS Press because I joined the press in 2002. And at that time, I thought I should not send a book manuscript to them. I left the press in 2018, so I guess I'm free. I have a book that I'm working on, so maybe it'll come out there. Okay, that's the answer.
Okay, great. At this time, we don't have any further questions, so you feel free on your time to take it to part 2.
Okay, let's proceed because I think we're just about on pace, but we don't want to fall behind. Okay, writing for digital publication. And mostly I'm going to be talking here about the nature of digital publishing or digital publications. So ePublications have transformed the distribution and consumption of academic material. Generally speaking, today books are issued as digital publications with a print-on-demand option. And journals, frequently it's the same situation, that they're issued as a digital publication, but there will be a print version that will be mainly sent to libraries. When I started up as an academic, I subscribed to a number of journals, and it didn't cost very much to do that. So I have runs of 3 or 4 journals that just came to me once a month or once every 3 months or whatever the frequency was. People hardly ever do that anymore, and a lot of journals are priced in a way that is too expensive for individuals. So journals are mainly produced now for libraries. The problem for libraries is that journals have become very expensive. And there is a movement toward open access. And this is made possible by digital publishing because it's, of course, online. But open access for journals is becoming increasingly important. And what we find now is that readers are using online material in preference to going to the library and looking at physical publications. Now, this also changes the way people search for material. When I started off, there were journal collections in libraries and a reading room for them. And most people would go to the reading room for journals maybe once every 3 or 4 months. And they would probably have a handful of journals that they looked at every time they went. And there would be other journals they might look at once or twice a year because occasionally there would be an article there that they wanted. I don't think any libraries have that anymore, and certainly academics don't do that. So there are a lot of advantages to digital publishing and digital publications. First of all, there's the electronic transmission of files. You don't have to print out a copy of your article and send it in for almost any journal. They will ask you to send it in as an electronic file. For book publishing, it's now possible to print books in multiple locations. So years ago, again, talking about NUS Press, we had an advantage because printing was cheap in Singapore and cheaper still in the region. But then once we printed the books, we had to ship them somewhere. And so that added to the cost. What can be done now is that you have the electronic version of the book. You have a contract with a print-on-demand publisher in North America, one in Australia, one in Europe. So you send the file to the print-on-demand publisher, and they will produce the book and mail it out in the country. Another advantage is that you can have large-scale maps, you can have audio and video clips in a publication. But in fact, this isn't happening very much, and I'll talk about that in a minute. You can have live links to source materials. You can have searchable text. And you can create digital archives. So long-term storage of electronic files. Now this is a mixed blessing because long-term storage sounds very good. But think of this, books that were published 300 years ago as physical objects are still around. Material that was digitized back in the 1980s sometimes cannot be read today. So long-term storage is easy to do. You put stuff onto a computer somewhere and it's stored. The question is, first of all, the medium is not going to last forever, so they will have to be recopied occasionally. And secondly, the question of whether people will be able to read them 20, 30, or 50 years down the line. And finally, electronic publishing reduces costs associated with printing, storage, and shipping. So a question that people will ask is whether articles published in e-journals or e-books are different from those in print publications. And generally the answer is no. The reason for that is something we'll talk about in just a minute. Secondly, can digital publications transform scholarship by including audio and video clips, color, detailed maps, and so on? Well, this was always the promise. And when digital publishing began, people were very excited about it because it looked like you could do just about anything. You could break out of the bounds of the physical book. And the answer to that is yes, but there are a lot of issues in the way. So let's look at some of those issues. First of all, printing a book now uses a PDF, portable document format file. Online versions of a journal use the same PDFs, which means that whatever's in the PDF has to be something you can do in print. there are copyright issues with sound, video, and with maps. And it's very difficult already to get copyright sorted out with a lot of print material. Finding who holds the copyright to a sound clip or a video clip or to a map can be very difficult. So getting rights to use already published material in a new publication is complicated. But beyond that, you also have a problem of how do you protect material in what you have published against piracy once you've put it online. Then there are technical issues that limit what you can do. One problem is that there is a lack of uniform standards governing sound and images. And people who are looking at articles are using a whole variety of different devices, iPads, phones, computers, and they're not always compatible with the file that's being sent out. And finally, there's the size of the files. And files with a lot of illustrations are already a bit large. And by the time you put in video and sound clips, the file can become very, very large indeed. So that is also another problem. Now, these are not problems that can't be solved, but at the moment they haven't been solved, and that's delaying the possibility of developing digital publication further. So ePublications really have not transformed content. They've transformed, as I said, the way that people are distributing journals and books, the way people are accessing them, but the content itself is still pretty much as it always was. You think about what you see on a screen when you're looking at a journal, and think about what you would see if you had that in a physical journal. And frequently, all that's happened is that the page that would have been in the journal is now on a screen. And the future, to a great extent, has to do with funding. And also it has to do with how universities evaluate scholarly communication. Because at the moment, universities generally are not looking for all these wonderful things, all the bells and whistles, the maps, the video clips and audio clips. What they're looking for is the same thing they looked for all along, which is what is the impact of an article? How many people are reading it? How many people are citing it? So until that changes, there's not much incentive for authors to try and do adventurous things. So what do you need to watch for in the future? Well, first of all, articles in edited books are going to have citation counts and impact factors. It will be possible to buy them individually or other way around for publishers to sell them individually. Open access is already challenging the dominance of commercial academic publishers, and this will continue. Commercial academic publishers are responding by offering open access. So one way or the other, you're likely to see much more open access than you did in the past. And university presses are caught in the middle because university presses have been struggling for a long time. They've been struggling against the commercial presses because the commercial presses dominate the major journal publications. But they have to have some income, and university presses depend on the income they get from selling primarily monographs, in some cases from selling journals. And if they don't have that income, that is, if everything goes to open access, then university presses are going to be in a very difficult position. Finally, what is a publication? What is a book? What is a journal? Well, I think we all have a sense of what those things are. But if a publication becomes an online production, and if it's full of video and audio, it is so different that we may have to redefine the meaning of publication. So what do you need to know about writing something that will be in a digital publication? I think the answer is that you need to understand and think about the way digital publications are accessed and the way they're used. So coming back to what I said about going to the library and looking at journals, I would go look at certain journal titles and see what they had inside. I don't think people very much do that anymore. They look for terms. You do a search online for a certain term and various articles come up. And search engines that are doing that are finding titles, abstracts, and keywords. So you need to pay a lot of attention to what goes into the title and the abstract and the keyword. Hyperlinks appear increasingly in sources. So I'm sure you've all seen articles. You go to the footnote and you click on something in the footnote and you can actually go to the original article. This requires accurate citations. And according to one story I heard, when older articles began to be digitized and this kind of linking was put in place, they discovered that a lot of prominent scholars had been very sloppy in their citations. The citation was to the right article, but it may be the wrong issue, the wrong date, the wrong page number. So you need to be particularly careful now that your citations are correct and accurate. And finally, the headings and subheadings are important guides for readers. This was always true, but I think more so now because of the way people are reading. If you have somebody who is skimming through an article and picking up these headings and subheadings, you want them to tell people what the article is about and where you are in your conversation with them. Because some readers are following the links and citations, they're jumping off to another article. Maybe they go through 2 or 3 articles, then, oh yeah, I'll go back to the first one. So it really helps if you can, when they come back, if they can see quickly where they are. Also, I talked the other day about Prepress and Prepress servers and how preliminary versions of articles can be put up on these Prepress servers. If they go on a Prepress server, they can remain accessible even after the final version is published. So you need to be a bit careful about what you put up on a preprint server. And also increasingly, particularly in the sciences, but also in disciplines, perhaps like economics, funding agencies and journals are requiring that the data that an author uses should be placed online. And remember that when an article is uploaded, that is, you've submitted it to a journal, the journal has finally put it out to the public, it's been uploaded, it's online. The publishers will treat this as the version of record. If you discover a mistake after that, and you write to the publisher and say, oh, this was the wrong date, I got the data wrong, it can be changed easily in a digital file, but because it's the version of record, any change will be recorded as a correction. So the original version will be there, and then there will be a note saying, okay, the author made a mistake, and this is actually the correct information. Okay, so this is the end of part 2. Any questions?
Great, yeah, thanks. We have 2 questions. The first is from Dr. Soraya Afif of UI, and it's about this question of conflict of interest, right? When we submit a journal, we see there, you know, make your statement, the disclosure of conflict of interest. Can you elaborate more about the conflict of interest issue? And furthermore, what should we disclose if asked by the journal? If there is, for example, conflict of interest, can we still publish it? What's your guidance around this issue?
Well, fundamentally, the decision for that would be with the journal editor. You should certainly disclose anything that seems like a potential conflict of interest. The serious ones usually are not in social sciences and humanities so much, but they would be in the sciences. You know, somebody's gotten money from a drug company and they've done research and now they're saying, oh, this drug is wonderful. Those are very clear. And if you get caught doing that sort of thing, you're going to be facing maybe career-ending problems. The social science and humanities, there are similar potential things. It's probably best to think of it, if you're going to get a personal benefit beyond the benefit of getting the citation, whether it's a financial benefit or something else, that's probably a potential conflict of interest. And so at the very least, you should write to the editor of the journal and say, well, here's the situation, what do you think? I also get people writing me when I've submitted an article to them as a possible referee. And they may write back and they say, well, I figured out who the author is because I happen to have seen this paper done in a conference. Is that a problem? Well, it's only a problem if there's some close tie between the referee and the author. And if there is, then the referee needs to explain that. So that's a potential problem. There are lots of other things that could come up, but I think fundamentally it goes back to what I said earlier on, that we rely on people to be honest. And if there's something about an article or something about what's going on that feels wrong to you, then you probably need to ask the editor.
Okay, great. Thanks. I think that's a great elaboration. We have a second question here from Hoy Risa Pohan, Risa from UMN. What if the author has many variables, right, in their article, and they separate it and chop it by variable for similar data, for example, and publish it in a different journal? What do you think about this scenario?
Well, again, this is talking about salami publishing, and it really comes down to how substantial each article is. Sometimes people try to stuff too much in a single article, and that's a mistake. Sometimes you have somebody who is, their data is spread out over 5 articles, and that's really not enough. If it's too thin, there's a good chance that the editor of a journal will say so. This just doesn't have enough substance. And ideally, the editor will tell you it's the other way around, that you've got too many things going on here. I suppose the simple answer to this, though, is that an article answers a question. And fundamentally, an article can answer one question. So you look at your data and you say, is all this data answering a single question, or is this set of data answering one question, another set of data answering a different question? Going along with this is a question of just how much data you need to include. And generally speaking, this will differ from journal to journal, from discipline to discipline. But if you have a lot of mathematical data, for example, sometimes the answer to that is what you do is put the data somewhere where people can access if they want to see it. And what you do in the article is you write up a summary saying these are the conclusions of the data. But don't go through the calculations, don't go through the statistical tests in the article. But as Siddharth would tell me very quickly, this depends entirely on the discipline and the journal.
Okay, great. We also have additional questions coming in from our YouTube participants, from Anita Ajali.
I think we need to get on actually right now because we're running low on time. And
okay, that's fine. We'll table them to the next session. Please go ahead. Thank you, Dr.
Okay, well, bear in mind that what we're going to do after this is collect these questions, and then we're going to put together an FAQ page answering some of the questions that have come in. So we'll see how the time goes, but I think we need to proceed now, which is to part 3, why your dissertation is not a book. So dissertations look like books, but they aren't books. Dissertations are about 3 things. The author demonstrates a mastery of the literature on the subject. The author demonstrates a mastery of the relevant theory and the ability to do research and to write up research findings. The purpose of the dissertation is to demonstrate what the author has learned. And the readers of a dissertation are usually a very small group of professors, and they will be familiar with most of the material before it goes into the dissertation. In fact, the supervisor probably even is familiar with the research data. So the dissertation will not tell them much that's new. That doesn't work for a book. So most dissertations, even good ones, should not and do not become books. Most dissertations will have material providing 2 or 3 articles. One of the big problems with the dissertation is that when you're picking a topic, your job is to figure out something that nobody has researched and written about before. The best way, the simplest way of doing that is that you pick some small topic. You want something that's manageable. You want something that is going to be new. So a small under-researched topic will make a very good dissertation. It will not make a good book. So generally speaking, I think it's fair to say that a lot of dissertations present new research on small issues, while monographs are addressing larger topics. Not only that, in many universities today, articles that are published in good journals are really preferable to books. And the reason for that, of course, is the citations. Articles in a good journal will go into a citation index. You can find out how many people have read it, how many people have cited it, what the impact is. And that is the kind of thing that universities want to measure. I've talked to people at universities who say, well, in my university, you can publish 1 book and it's equivalent to publishing 2 good articles. Now, the amount of effort that goes into a book is much more than writing and publishing 2 articles. Reputable publishers almost never review unrevised dissertations. When I started off at NUS Press, I had an idea that, well, maybe we could do something with dissertations. And I remember at one point I sent a dissertation to a referee and I got a really angry response back saying, you sent me a dissertation. I'm not even going to look at it. It's not a book. So I quickly changed my policy about that. So turning a dissertation into a book requires that you rethink the material. It requires that you rethink the audience. And after that, you write a different manuscript. Another problem with dissertations is that readers don't particularly like reading them. Now, part of the reason for that is that a reader going into a dissertation is going to find a lot of material that is all this background. And if you are a scholar in the field, you know the background too, so that it's not very interesting for you to try and read through that. And finally, dissertations nowadays are generally online once they've been passed by the committee. Anybody can read them freely. And libraries will not buy books that are based on dissertations because they figure that nobody is going to be looking at the book when they can go online and look at the dissertation. This is a problem for people who are trying to write books based on dissertations. And the warning we give people is that you've written a book, you've done a lot of effort, you've reworked all your material in your dissertation. It is no longer a dissertation, it's a book. The publisher still has to sell it. And what you want to avoid is anything that tells buyers that this is based on a dissertation. So just as a simple example, your supervisor helped you enormously and you want to thank your supervisor. If you say, thanks to my supervisor, Professor so-and-so, for all of his help, it will probably kill the chances of you publishing or selling your book. Now you can get around that easily enough by saying, thank you to Professor so-and-so for assisting with the manuscript. Just don't mention that he happens also to be your supervisor. But this has become a big issue because most libraries purchase books through central agencies. They don't actually go through catalogs and pick out title by title. They send a list to these central agencies saying, we want books in, say, political science. that are this type of publication. And we do not want dissertations. Now, these days, it's usually pretty easy if something is based on a dissertation and it says so, to figure that out. So these central agencies that sell to libraries will simply discard anything that they see that says it's based on a dissertation. So if you're moving from dissertation, if you're going to ignore all my advice and say, okay, I still want to publish from my dissertation, let me just explain something about what you need to do. First of all, publications require new information. And so looking at your dissertation, you have a theory section and a literature section, and neither one is likely to say anything new. So what you want to do is focus on your research findings. You have several options. You can turn a chapter into an article. You can answer some new question based on your material. And so it won't actually be exactly like your dissertation because you're using it to do something different. You can include material that you left out of your dissertation in an article or a book manuscript. You can go back and do more research, of course. But the important thing is you build your article or your book around an argument. And if you take one thing away from this series of workshops, that should be it. There's a man named William Germano who's written something called From Dissertation to Book. This is published by the University of Chicago Press. And this is his summary of the difference between a dissertation and a book. A dissertation is an academic requirement. Somebody writes a book because they want to speak broadly. The audience I mentioned, your PhD committee versus, we hope, if you're a publisher, thousands of readers. Realistically, if we get hundreds, that's pretty good, but we would like to have thousands. Dissertation will review scholarship that's already in existence. A book will build on scholarship. Dissertations very often have a large number of quotations. Book publishers prefer that you have a very small number of quotations. Now, there are various reasons for that, and partly it's got to do with copyright issues. A dissertation hides the author's voice. Now, what that means is that any author will have a particular style, and it's something that develops over an author's career. A book values the voice of the author, the distinctive features of the way an author writes. A dissertation will be structured to show off the analytic skills of the author, while a book will be structured around a core idea. A dissertation will probably contain many examples illustrating the main points, and they'll be repetitive, whereas a book will have selected examples in support of the core idea. Now, I'm going to talk briefly about just three of these points. So first of all, the core idea. Any article or book needs a core idea that holds the material together. And basically, an article can only have one single core idea. It becomes the basis of a narrative, and that narrative runs through the entire article. And any other information you put in should be related to the core idea. Now, based on what I've said before, let me just sort of do a reminder here that the best core ideas are probably answers to good research questions. And so you have a good question, it's probably going to begin with why or how. You answer that question, and that becomes the core of your article. So consider an article on the Indonesian diet. And by this, I mean, of course, the food that people eat in Indonesia. This might include information about nutrition. It might have details about trade in agricultural products, about cultivation of food, and about health. Now, each one of these is a big topic in itself. But if your topic is the Indonesian diet, then whatever you have to say about nutrition and trade and so on needs to be related to that core idea. And so you may say that something like the Indonesian diet has changed. Let's narrow this down a bit because somebody has a specific paper on this. talking about a particular location in Indonesia, where the paper says the diet in this place has changed from sago and root crops to rice. Now, there are implications with that for nutrition. In this particular area, there is not much rice grown, so there's an implication for trade because trade has to bring the rice in. There are implications for agriculture because people have to grow something to buy the rice, so they have to grow cash crops. And of course, there will be health implications. So you can write about the diet, talk about these different things, but only with respect to the core idea. So these are very different topics, but you tie everything together around that core idea. Okay, the author's voice. So in dissertations, the author's voice is usually neutral. The author takes the position of omniscient narrator. I'm an outsider. I've got all this information, I'm going to tell you about it. The one place where you find an exception to this frequently is anthropology. And where anthropologists have done participant observation, then you probably have a different narrative approach. But if you're writing a book compared to writing a dissertation, you might consider alternative perspectives. Try to write in a different voice than you used for the dissertation. But in any case, you need to speak with authority. And fundamentally, you take control of the material. You say, okay, I know this. I'm going to tell you about this. And then you say, here is the question I'm answering. Here's the information I have. And you were talking as an authority on this topic. Now, the tendency when you start writing something is that you just are recording, okay, I've got this information, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. But at some point you have to take hold of what every manuscript you're working on, step back from it and say, okay, what am I saying with this? Think about that, and then you take control of it. Okay, this is the point I'm trying to make with all this. Here's the information. And once you start doing that, you really are making your way into professional writing. So in conclusion, let's just say something about academic writing. Research is fun. Writing, maybe not so much. Trying to write without a plan is very painful. Getting work accepted, of course, is wonderful. But finalizing a work for publication, well, that's a bit less wonderful because you have to make sure that everything is in place. You've got to complete all the references that you kind of been careless about. You have to check the wording on and on and on. And this is not a lot of fun. When you reread your publication later, okay, you've gotten it published, years have gone by, you go back and read it again. And you will be amazed at how good it is, sometimes. And other times you'll pick it up and you'll be amazed at how bad it is. This is a very common experience. It's my experience, and a lot of people I've talked to have said the same thing. So remember, a published work really has a life of its own. Once it's out there, you've lost control of it. And I think most people who've published have had the experience of finding an article or book where somebody has quoted their work, and they look at that and they say, but that's not what I was trying to say. They misunderstood. Or they're using it in a way that I would never agree to. There's nothing you can do about this. So in conclusion, whatever you publish is going to be with you for the rest of your career, for better or for worse. It can help you go to conferences. It can be something that leads to invitations to contribute to a book, or it can be something that becomes a great embarrassment. So just be careful. And that's the end.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. It's always very difficult to talk about ethics, but you've covered such a wide breadth of topics on the practical as well as the conceptual. I'm going to try to get to a couple of the questions here in the order that they've come in. I might prioritize things. I want to actually raise this last question that came in from Elizabeth Rukmini because it's specific to dissertation, which was the more recent topic that you raised.
Okay, well, hold on just a minute. We need to check with AIFIS as to how long we have for this, I think.
Yeah, my timeline has through the 30-minute mark. Is that correct, Mbak Neta?
Yeah, thank you very much. So Paul and Micah, we have about 15 to 20 minutes, so that's okay. And it's okay to be a little bit slightly shortly before the 30 minutes benchmark.
Okay,
we'll take care of it. But just go through the questions and then I'll let you know when it's time to go.
Okay, that's fine.
So would you like me to go through all the questions and you pick from them, or just
no,
just go through them one by one?
You pick, but you said you had one that you wanted to start with.
Well, one was about a dissertation. The other's about the more practical aspects of publication. But this question about the dissertation, this is from Elizabeth Rukmini, who says, a dissertation in Europe is especially in the Netherlands, consists of several published articles. What do you think about this and the trend towards dissertations per article publication?
Well, the European tradition is very heavy on publication, especially the German and Dutch tradition, France too, I guess, where somebody needs to publish their dissertation before it can be accepted. And there were specialty publishing houses that handled dissertations. So this means that if you wrote a dissertation and you published it that way, then that was it. You didn't have a chance to publish it as a book and probably not much as an article. So that tradition has been around for a long time. What started, and it was a bit expensive because usually the author had to provide funding to cover the cost of the publication. What started to happen is that there are now, I think especially in Germany, there are a lot of new university presses. They're open access. And what they're doing is putting dissertations online. And according to what I've read about this, this satisfies university requirements for publication. So that's one change that's happening. So far as dissertation made up of publications, this is really, well, I guess with any dissertation, it hinges on the requirements of the university and of the country. So there's nothing much more to say about that. I get the question sometimes going in a slightly different direction, where somebody will say, well, if I have a chapter of my dissertation, but my dissertation has not been submitted yet, can I publish it? And the answer to that is always, you have to ask your university what their policy is about this, because some universities say you cannot publish any part of the dissertation until it's been approved, been passed by the committee, and sometimes until you've actually been awarded the degree. Other universities are much more flexible. So it's really just a question of, you're in a university writing a dissertation, you need to follow the requirements there.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have some additional questions. I'll go through them in the order that they came in. This one's about predatory journals, which you talked about earlier. The question's from Anita Ajali from YouTube, from our YouTube participants. We do not know the real fee of this authorized journal. And how could we know whether it is a predatory one or not? I think you addressed this, but maybe you'd like to reflect on this a little bit more.
Well, you can't always tell very easily because the predatory journals are trying to look like they aren't predatory. But it is possible that a good journal will ask you for a fee, especially if it's an open access journal. And this is something that has changed considerably in the past, I suppose, 20 or 30 years. So science journals once upon a time didn't charge fees. I think no journals charged fees, and it was considered completely wrong to pay for publication. So the change took place first in the science journals. And now a lot of and any open access journal has a problem about how to pay for the costs. And one solution for that is that you charge an article processing charge. And there's nothing wrong with doing this. So the fact that you're being asked to pay doesn't mean that you're looking at a predatory journal. It should be easy to find out how much the charge is. And I should warn you that sometimes these charges can be very high. Cambridge University Press will publish an article in their journals as an open access article. Now that means the journal itself is for sale, and other articles may not, in the issue that the issue your article is in may not be open access. But you could make your article open access, and all you have to do is pay them something like, I think it's around $2,800 US, and they will make it open access. I've been working with people in Cambridge journals for quite some time, and they always tell me they don't have anybody that actually accepts this offer, but it's available. The article processing charges can run anywhere from $500 or $1,000 up to $5,000. And the problem that open access journals faced is that these charges probably are not going to cover the production costs. So open access is a great idea for you as a reader. It's not a wonderful idea unless they can find a way to pay the costs. So let me just say one quick thing about Indonesia. Indonesia has close to 8,000 academic journals, which is in some ways it's a great thing. In some ways it's a problem because there's so much material being published that it's really hard to keep track of it. But the great thing about Indonesian journals is that most of them seem to be open access, and they are not charging article processing charges, the APCs, because the cost of producing the journal is being picked up by the universities. So this is a wonderful arrangement, and let's hope it keeps going.
Okay, we have time for one final question. This question is from Niluh Nyoman Srimalini from Udayana University. Are there any consequences if for a certain reason, and I'm not sure exactly about the case here, for a certain reason the author does not intend to give or upload their data to a publisher or journal?
Well, there could be a consequence if you say you won't do it, the journal may not publish your article. It's not a requirement in the academic world generally, but there are two things that some funding agencies are starting to require that. So if you have gotten money from a funding agency that has that requirement, then you'd better do it because you may not ever get funds from them again. Some journals expect this, and the journal should tell you early in the process that this is one of their requirements. If you don't want to do that, then you don't submit to that journal. It looks to me like we still do have a bit of time, though.
Okay.
Yeah, hi. Well, we do, however, so I would, unfortunately, due to the time limitation, so we would really like to thank you, Dr. Paul Kratoska, and you as well, Dr. Micah Fisher. And by the way, welcome, Professor Siddharth Chandra. Thank you for joining us since the very beginning of the session today. Professor Chandra, you might remember, he spoke at another session previously, as well as he's also president of AIFIS. So the session today concludes the public lecture sessions of the workshop, and we would like to thank you all, Bapak dan Ibu, for joining our session today and the previous sessions last week. We hope that you find the webinars insightful. Again, we regret we could not answer all of the questions during the time limitation that we have, but as Dr. Kratoska mentioned, we will prepare a list of questions in the form of FAQ, frequently asked questions, and we'll publish them on our website, and we'll let you know when this FAQ has already been published. Just quickly before we get off, the webinar, I also excited to announce another international conference for scholars of Indonesian studies in Indonesia and the US and everywhere really, that is planned for June 2021. This will be a collaboration between AIFIS and the Michigan State University, and I would like to invite the mastermind behind all this workshop, Ibu Dr. Isabella Tirtowaluyo, to say a few words before we close the session. Silakan, Ibu Bella.
Yeah, thank you, Brunetta. And it's really a teamwork for this workshop, but we are very delighted for a huge participation for the public seminars component of this academic writing workshop. Of course, we thank all the speakers, workshop session presenters who have really bestowed upon us a lot of great wisdom, a lot of information, also the moderators that have been supporting each session. We would like to invite all of the lecturers and professors in Indonesia, as well as scholars and researchers of Indonesian studies, to consider presenting and continuing the networking opportunity, presenting your research and connecting with other scholars doing research on Indonesia in this conference. It's an international conference. Like Ibu Neta mentioned, we are planning this for late June. We will start planning for this for the call for proposal either late January or early February. Please look out for information for the call for proposals, and we welcome your participation and to really expand this network and expand the great work that everyone is doing in research in all the fields that it has to do with Indonesian studies. Thank you, Ibu Neta. I wonder if Dr. Sudah Chandra, you would like to say a couple of words as well?
Just a couple of things to all the attendees. Some of you may know that this workshop consists of two types of activities. One is these open public lectures, and thank you very much, Dr. Krotowska, for a fantastic talk today. As a slightly later career scholar, I find these presentations to be very valuable. They're very good refreshers, and they remind us about how we should do our work to produce the highest quality research. About the conference, the reason we've decided to organize this conference, there are actually multiple reasons. One reason is that clearly, given the number of people who are attending this workshop, there's a lot of very good material being produced on Indonesia. And this conference is an international conference. It will give you the opportunity to present your research in an international forum. So I hope some of you will consider it as a career opportunity for yourselves. Second, this conference will be held virtually. And one of the biggest barriers that prevents communication, international communication among scholars, is the travel barrier. So by eliminating that, we hope that more Indonesian and American researchers will be able to talk to each other, share their ideas, and hopefully in the future collaborate and write papers together and enhance their own research productivity. So that's the second goal. And then the third goal is we will be holding a variety of meetings in conjunction with this conference. We hope, we have not yet confirmed this, but we hope that one of those will be a workshop that is designed in a very similar manner to the one that you are attending right now. So that will probably start before the conference and will either end during the conference or later on. So that will provide an opportunity for some of you who present manuscripts for the workshop to potentially present your manuscripts at the conference as well. And then finally, by interacting with scholars from other countries, including the United States, but hopefully other countries as well, we hope that your research will gain exposure in international circles. There may be editors, there may be people who can refer your article to editors and say, you know, pay attention to this article. You know, maybe you want to write to the author and solicit their contribution. I'm sure some of that is happening during this workshop as well. But this may be an opportunity for you to network and to gain contacts with which you can get your work more visibility. So thank you very much for attending. We will be having one more session, so let me turn the mic over to Neta.
Thank you very much, Professor Siddharth Chandra and Ibu Dr. Isabella Tirtawaluyo. We're very pleased, and please join us next year. And again, terima kasih sekali telah mengikuti seluruh sesi-sesi public lectures public minggu lalu dan juga minggu ini. Terima kasih Bapak dan Ibu. Dan kami akan menutup sesi hari ini. Dan sampai bertemu, tentunya
Ibu
hopefully
Neta,
yes.
Ada satu lagi ya minggu depan.
Sure. Silakan. Iya, satu lagi closing session. Jadi tidak bukan berupa lectures, tapi yes, closing session tentunya. Dan untuk seperti Profesor Siddharth Chandra sebutkan, please join us di sesi International Conference next year. Akan ada similar workshop dan sesi-sesi lainnya, dan terutama network, continuation of contacts, dan kolaborasi. Terima kasih sekali lagi, kami akan menutup sesi pada hari ini, dan salam sukses selalu untuk Bapak dan Ibu semuanya. Terima kasih. Silakan Bapak Anas. Terima kasih juga untuk tim AIFIS, Pak Johan Purnama dan Pak Dr. Johan Purnama, Dr. Yosef Jakababa, Bapak Anas